the session. This is part 3 of the micronutrient series, where we're going to talk about the major minerals. So now, going into a little bit of background, I don't have much here because I kind of want to save I want to save the main part of this video for when we actually go into the major minerals on the other side of this board. So major minerals, they're known as inorganic elements, right? And basically what that means is, unlike the vitamins, inorganic elements, they tend to stay in their compound, right? They tend to maintain their chemical compound. Whereas if you remember from the fat soluble and the water soluble vitamins videos, specifically the water soluble vitamins, they can be destroyed, right? Major minerals, they can't be destroyed, right? They typically, because they're inorganic, they can't be destroyed. They just stay in your body when consumed, and then they stay there until they're excreted. Now, with that, calcium and phosphorus are the two major minerals that appear in largest amounts in your body. So what that means is, out of all the minerals that are here, calcium and phosphorus, as you can see, now this right here, this number is for a 132 pound person, right? This is about the amount of grams of each mineral that a person has, roughly, right? This is what has been found, by health experts, that a 132 pound person contains about this amount of grams of each element or each mineral. So now, about a pound is approximately equal to 454 grams, right? So the reason I wrote that is so that you can take these right here, these minerals. Now on the left side, these are the major minerals, okay? And on the right side, these are the trace minerals. Now the trace minerals we'll actually talk about in part 4, all right? But I wanted to put the trace minerals down. I wanted to go ahead and put the grams, the amount of grams that exist in a 132 pound person, just so that you can kind of get a full picture. And I'm also going to supplement this with a nice bar graph, right? I'm going to take a screenshot of a bar graph, and then I'll go ahead and put that in this video as well after I'm done, talking about this here. But calcium and phosphorus, as mentioned, they appear in the largest amounts. Calcium being 1,150 grams, and phosphorus being 600 grams. Now, as you can imagine, the reason why calcium exists in such large amounts is simply because calcium, our bones rely on that. Our bones and our teeth, they rely on calcium and vitamin D, right, in order to mineralize and to maintain strong bones and strong teeth. But now, potassium, about 210 grams, sulfur, 150 grams, sodium and chloride, they're both at about 90 grams. Magnesium right here is about 30 grams, okay? So these are all the major minerals. Now, I also wrote this here so that you can see the difference between the major and the trace minerals. Major minerals, they exist in the larger amounts than the trace minerals. As you can see, these numbers here are very small in grams. That's why they call it trace minerals. So iron, right, that's 2.4 grams. Trace mineral iron is probably the one that's the most abundant in your body out of all the rest of them. Zinc is about 2.0 grams, so not that much of a difference, but just a little bit. Then you got copper, 0.09 grams. Manganese and iodine, they're both about the same, and so is selenium. So all three, manganese, iodine, selenium, 0.02 grams. Now, mind you, because they're minerals, right, just like the vitamins, they're still measured in micrograms. Now, with that said, we're going to go ahead and go into the minerals. As you'll notice, the deficiency disease column, there isn't any for any of these minerals. So, we can go ahead and skip that column. But there are, of course, deficiency symptoms, right? What can happen if you don't get enough. Now, as spoken about before, whenever there's a toxicity, there's an upper limit established so that you don't reach toxic levels. So 2 of these, potassium and sulfur, they don't have toxicity, so that means they don't have upper limits established. So now we're going to start with sodium. Okay, so sodium, and I have here, you'll notice there's a plus sign. Basically what that means is, without getting too scientific, sodium is a positive ion. Okay, so its roles in the body is it maintains the acid-base balance. It also maintains nerve impulse transmission and muscle contractions. Okay, so with there not being a deficiency disease, there are symptoms though, deficiency symptoms. So when you don't intake enough sodium, you could be looking at what's called hyponatremia. And basically what that is excessive sodium loss. with that also comes headache, confusion, stupor, and some seizures. Now, to go into a little bit of hyponatremia, I want to give y'all some examples of, certain situations where hyponatremia may, start to present itself. So typically hyponatremia is experienced among athletes. Certain events, right, that athletes compete in, certain events that they engage in. So like maybe not a 5K, because a 5K is only about 3.1 or so miles. So that's not really a good example, but a 10K might be, right? Any event that requires ultra endurance, so like a 10K counts, a marathon definitely counts, as well as sprinting, right? If you're like Usain Bolt or Sha'Carri Richardson, sprinting, okay, those events can cause hyponatremia if you're not careful about your sodium intake. Because what happens, of course, some of you may already know this, but when you work out, any kind of physical activity that you do, when you're sweating a lot, it's not just water that you're shedding, right? You also shed sodium, you shed electrolytes, okay? So when you keep shedding electrolytes, that of course is going to lead to your hyponatremia. That's going to affect your ability to be able to, for your muscles to contract and relax. That also affects your nerve impulse transmission, right? So it's going to affect parts of your nervous system, your nerves throughout your body that send signals. It can start messing with that. So you would definitely want to make sure that you get the sodium that you need, especially if you're an athlete or if you're any kind of person that you work out heavily and you're to the point where you work out intense, hardcore, and you're sweating a lot. It's not just water that you want to intake. You also want to, get back sodium too, right? The sodium that you lose, the electrolytes, you want to put some of that back as well. And sodium, of course, is typically not the type of mineral that's hard to get. So, there's that too. So now hypertension is a toxicity symptom, okay? For those of you that don't know what hypertension is, that's basically high blood pressure. So when you intake too much sodium, you could be looking at hypertension. And with hypertension comes risk of different heart diseases, such as atherosclerosis. Now, this one resonates with me a little bit because high blood pressure does run in my family. I have dealt with hypertension, a time or two in the past. So, with that, this does relate to me in the same light that high cholesterol relates to me. You also could be looking at, certain forms of cancer too, if you're really not careful and you're not getting a hold. You're not getting a strong hold on the amount of sodium that you consume. Now, recommendations for men and women: 1,500 milligrams per day. So 1,500 milligrams is pretty easy to get to. Now, of course, if you're not, you could consume less than that and still be fine. 15 milligrams is just a recommendation. Sodium, like I said, it's not something that our bodies are typically deficient in anyway. But, like if you spread salt on foods or what have you, then there's your sodium intake right there. Like it's that easy. You spread sodium on some foods, or you eat foods that have a certain amount of sodium in it. Obviously though, if you're looking at foods that have sodium in it, you want to be mindful of how much sodium comes from a serving. The upper limit is 2,300 milligrams. So in order for you to avoid toxicity, you don't want to go any more than 2,300, because if you're doing that on a daily basis, then you could be starting to worry about the hypertension and things like that. So it's cool to, for example, to spread salt on your foods or whatnot, but if you're doing it excessively, the milligrams can add up pretty quickly, all right? And the sources. So as you can imagine, right, table salts, right? So I mean, if you use like a salt grinder, or if you use like, just the table salt that you pour on foods, either way, that's probably the quickest way you can get sodium outside of getting foods that already have sodium in it. Of course, certain processed meats and foods, right? Although you want to try to limit how much processed foods you do eat, they still do provide a certain amount of sodium, enough for you to be able to get the recommended dose. And most diets anyway. That's why I was saying, sodium is not really a mineral that's hard for us to get. Now, chloride is the next one. And chloride has a minus sign here. Chloride is a negative ion, especially when so what happens with chloride, the reason it becomes a negative ion is because chlorine tends to mix with either sodium or hydrogen. When that happens, that's what makes it a negative ion. Now, roles is it maintains acid-base balance and electrolyte balance, the same as sodium, really. So it's also a part of hydrochloric acid. Now, what hydrochloric acid is, it basically is maintains the acidity in our gastric juices. So hydrochloric acid, our gastric juices, that's definitely necessary for the digestive process. While there's no deficiency disease symptoms, though, it hardly does occur, right? We mostly get chloride in most things. But in cases of diarrhea and vomiting and heavy sweat loss, you could deplete yourself of chloride. Now, of course, toxicity, same thing. Conversely, with toxicity, you can start looking at vomiting as a condition, okay? And I put stomach acid in parentheses. I don't know if you can see it, but I put that there because, of course, when you, and specifically the example that I thought about when I wrote this was, for those of y'all out there that, love to drink, okay? Nothing wrong with, drinking or whatnot as long as you're being safe and careful. But for those of you that like to get wasted, specifically y'all are my target for this particular mineral. How you get wasted to the point where, in order for your body to avoid liver damage, your body gets in this state where it now has to get rid of all the alcohol that you consumed. Well, when you do that, of course, when you throw up so much, essentially, you lose out on chloride. But not only does chloride is not the only thing that can happen. A lot of you may know that with stomach acid, because it's it's acid essentially, it can mess up your teeth too. It ruins your enamel. Okay, it kind of just de-strengthens your enamel, which could rot your teeth. So I understand some people, like, if you get sick or what have you, just you normally get sick, maybe you ate something bad or whatever, you're not feeling well, and sometimes you may have to do this in order to feel better. That's understandable, but all in all, you want to make sure that you're not doing this frequently. Okay, if you are doing this frequently, you are gonna have to maybe go see a doctor. All right, you have to go get some professional help, because each time you keep doing it, you will lose out on minerals. Now, for recommendations, men and women, if you're between the ages of 19 and 50, 2,300 milligrams a day. If you're between the ages of 50 to 71, 2,000 milligrams. And then for anyone that's 71 and up, that number jumps to, or rather goes down to 1,800 milligrams. All right. Now, the upper limit for all adults is 3,600 milligrams. And of course, sources, it's the same exact sources as sodium. Chloride exists in table salts, processed meats, and foods in most diets. And the reason being is because, as I mentioned, when chlorine mixes with sodium, that's how you get chloride. So that's why the sources are the same. Potassium, that's the next mineral we'll go over. Now, potassium is a positive. All right. Now, some of the roles in potassium, you have fluid and electrolyte balance, just like the first two. Okay, just like sodium and chloride. But now you also, in addition to that, have cell integrity, also nerve transmissions and muscle contractions, trade-offs for homeostasis. So basically what that means is, like sodium and potassium, what happens is they travel across the cell membranes, and your body will eventually pump them back in their places, in order to maintain, like, for example, a steady heartbeat, which is an example of homeostasis. So potassium and sodium, they tend to trade off sometimes in our bodies, right? Maybe a lot of us, especially me, I didn't know that until I read it. Over the deficiency symptoms, you will be looking at hypertension, kidney stones, bone turnover, okay, irregular heartbeat, muscle weakness, then glucose intolerance, which is definitely not something you want. I mean, you don't want any of these, but glucose intolerance, if you remember from my carbs video, glucose is our body's main source of energy. When there's an intolerance to glucose, you can be having some serious problems. And also, it could stop your heart too, if injected. Sometimes minerals can actually get injected through the veins. Now with potassium, if injected, it could stop your heart. So obviously the goal here is to get our minerals and vitamins from food. So you shouldn't ever be in a position where you may have to get injections, unless of course you're in a hospital and maybe you need IV to get fluids, meds, and stuff like that, right? That's different, okay? Now toxicity for potassium, there isn't one, which means there's no upper limit either. Recommendations for men, 3,400 milligrams a day. For women, 2,600 milligrams. And the sources that you can get potassium from, pretty much all whole foods, meats, milks, fruits, veggies, grains, legumes. Wide range of foods that you can get potassium from. Okay, some of y'all maybe like to eat bananas, right? Bananas provide loads of potassium. Different other types of fruits, apples, oranges, you know, and also potassium for those of us that are in the fitness realm as well, right? Those of us that work out a lot, you may know that potassium helps with muscle recovery. Weightlifting session, for example, you know, our muscle tissues get torn, and in the process of repairing, potassium, our body uses that to, you know, help repair our muscles that much faster. In addition to proteins, of course, right? Because with protein, that's really what your body is looking for, is amino acids to be able to help repair the muscle tissues, right? If you remember my proteins video, I talked about the protein collagen, and what that is that helps bring back, that's the connective tissue, right? Collagen provides the connective tissue to bring our muscles back, any tissues really, and brings them back even stronger, right? Builds them up. Okay, and that's how we get like the big muscles. Like if you're lifting for hypertrophy, you know, for bigger muscles, that's how you get it. You know, that's why you're told essentially, or you may have heard, to eat a lot of protein if you're trying to put on muscle. That's how that works. So now our next one is calcium. Okay, now as I wrote here, calcium is the most abundant. I talked about that, you know, earlier in the video, but that's the most abundant mineral in our bodies. And the roles, just like vitamin D, for strong bones and teeth. Okay. Now calcium, there are two different types of calciums in our bodies. You have blood calcium and then the calcium for bones. About 1% of calcium is in the blood, whereas the other 99% is for our bones. So the blood calcium, that's for like blood, that's from nerves, muscles, and even for blood clotting, right? That's where that comes into play. That's what that helps with. So now you have calcitonin, and you got the parathyroid, I believe, hormone, if I'm not mistaken. The parathyroid hormone, when coupled together with vitamin D, that, you know, essentially helps with specifically the nerves, muscles, and blood clotting. Okay, that's specifically for the blood calcium. So now there aren't any deficiency diseases, of course. So symptoms though. So if you're deficient in calcium, that's dangerous no matter what age you are. Okay, for kids, you're looking at stunted growth. All right, kids, they need calcium, right? Because kids, they grow, and as they grow, they need calcium in order to, you know, grow bones that are strong. Okay, so otherwise you could be looking at stunted growth in kids. All right, their bones never mature and get to their potential, right? They never reach their full potential if there's no calcium to help it along. Now, osteoporosis, of course, just like with vitamin D, that's another deficiency that you could be looking at with calcium. And if you remember, osteoporosis is essentially, you know, weak and brittle bones. If you have osteoporosis, you can be open to more fractures. That's why calcium is important. Now, pretty much I wrote flashback to vitamin D losses, because basically vitamin D and calcium, they have a direct relationship. It's very proportionate, if you will. They go hand in hand in how they operate in the body. You know, calcium, you know, and vitamin D, bones, teeth. And whenever you're deficient in one, it may cancel out the other. Not cancel it out, but it can affect your body's ability to absorb calcium. You essentially want to get both. Now, toxicity though, okay, a lot of you may know, especially those of you that deal with kidney stones, calcium oftentimes is the reason behind that. And genetics too, obviously. I'm not gonna, you know, leave that out. But genetics and, you know, overabundance of calcium in your body can start to lead your kidneys to form stones. Because our kidneys, you know, our kidneys essentially are the workhorse of our bodies, right, in a sense. Because our kidneys process pretty much everything, you know, that you can think of. It processes our macronutrients and even the micro that come in our body. The kidneys, they do, you know, the filtering, right, in conjunction working with the liver and whatnot, and of course some fluids, right, that our bodies need to help the liver and kidneys along. So if there's an overabundance of calcium, you can start forming stones because your blood calcium becomes elevated. Now you could also be looking at constipation and it can interfere with the absorption of other minerals. Now, recommendations for, this is men and women, okay? For anyone who is 19 through 50, and even 51 through 70, 1,000 milligrams a day is where that's what you're gonna want to get. Now, as we get older, here's where the difference comes into play. For men, if you're 71 and over, then that number increases to 1,200. Same thing for women that are at the age of 51 and up. Okay, if you're 51 and up as a woman, that number also increases to 1,200. Now, if you haven't figured it out, pretty sure you may know why that is. As we get older, our bones, they start to weaken a little bit anyway. It starts to get a lot more difficult to maintain muscles and maintain strong bones. So of course, because of that, the calcium levels have to go up just a little bit so that you're not missing out as you age. Now for upper limit, right? If you're 19 through 50, and this is men and women of course, but 19 through 50, 2,500 milligrams. You don't really want to go past that. And if you're 51 and up, 2,000. All right, so that's the maximum threshold you get before you start looking at toxic levels. And sources of calcium, pretty much anything with any milk products, fish, leafy greens, and the leafy greens basically are like bok choy, kale, and broccoli. Those are 3 examples that I wrote. Now the next most abundant mineral in our bodies would be the phosphorus. Phosphorus is also, believe it or not, found in bones and teeth. Okay. It's also used for energy metabolism, and it's found in phospholipid structures. So if you remember what that is from my fats video back in the Macronutrients series. Phospholipids is a type of lipid, it's a type of fat. Phospholipids basically consists of our hormones. Okay, so like testosterone for men, estrogen for women, all right, and some other hormones, adrenal. So phosphorus is found in some of our hormones and other phospholipid structures, right, our fatty structures. It's also found in DNA and RNA, which makes it essential for growth. Now, over to the deficiency symptoms, you simply could just be looking at muscle weakness and bone pain. I mean, neither one that you really want, but you know, the muscle weakness, right, that's because phosphorus is found in our bones and teeth. You know, bone pain as well, same thing. You know, if you're not getting enough of it, obviously if your body starts getting depleted of phosphorus, then you know that's where bone pain comes into play, and then subsequently, just like calcium, you may be looking at osteoporosis there too. Toxicity, it can disrupt your kidney function as well as bone metabolism. Okay, because again, just like calcium, right, too much calcium elevates your blood, leading to kidney stones. Well, phosphorus, it's similar to calcium in that way. It can disrupt your kidney function. Now, when your kidney function is elevated and it's doing more than it really should be for, you know, according to our DNA, how our bodies are supposed to, you know, for our kidneys, then that's when you can, you know, start looking at possible failure sometime along the line, somewhere down the line, if this keeps up. Now, men and women recommendations, 700 milligrams per day. Now, the upper limit is 4,000 milligrams per day. And sources, you can find phosphorus in a lot of different sources. Meats, fish, poultry, rice or chicken, eggs, milk, legumes, and even nuts. So basically anything, even if you're, for all dieting types, right? So if you're a meat eater, then you're not going to have any issues getting phosphorus. If you're a vegan, vegetarian, you still won't get any issues. As far as I know, vegetarians, they do still eat eggs. It's the vegans that don't eat any kind of animals whatsoever. Okay. But with that, even vegans and vegetarians, even if you decide you're not really with eating animals, then you still got legumes and nuts, right? So you can still get your phosphorus that way. All right, nearly finished. We are at magnesium now. Now, magnesium majorly exists in the bones, okay? It's also involved in enzyme systems. So like it synthesizes fat, proteins, and even nucleic acids. Now, it also has a relationship with calcium. So this one, all right, magnesium has with calcium. So calcium has the ability to synthesize muscle contraction as well as relaxation and even blood clotting, right? So that's what calcium does. Magnesium, however, inhibits that operation, right? So I don't want y'all to take that as that's a bad thing, right? That y'all gotta avoid magnesium because, you know, it inhibits blood clotting and muscle contractions. That's the difference with the relationship between magnesium and calcium. They essentially work together, right? The relationship they have, their dynamic, makes it good for our body's regulation of blood pressure and lung health. What you need is magnesium and calcium to work together, right? As long as they're working together and you're not deficient in one or the other, this is normal, okay? Over the deficiency symptoms. So if you're deficient in magnesium, you could be looking at exacerbated inflammation, also chronic diseases, right? Contribution to chronic diseases like heart disease. You could be looking at strokes, hypertension, all right, diabetes, and even cancer. So you do want to be mindful that you're not deficient in magnesium either. It could also impair your central nervous system, which could lead to, for an example, hallucinations that are seen during alcohol withdrawals. So for any of you out there that may know what that's like, you know, if you're going through withdrawals, maybe you're trying to not drink so much or you're trying to stop altogether, you know, this is why oftentimes, like with drinking and smoking, it's not really recommended that you just go cold turkey. Now some people can do it. I'm not saying that, you know, you shouldn't. Some people can do it, but you want to try to weed yourself off of it, right, slowly. Because, you know, alcohol withdrawal, if you do cold turkey that way, you can end up seeing hallucinations. That oftentimes that's tied back to a lack of magnesium as well. Toxicity, now this is only for non-food sources. What I mean by that is supplements. So if you take supplements to get your magnesium in, if you're taking, you know, like vitamins, right? You take a multivitamin or what have you, or if it's injected, right? If you're taking magnesium injections, magnesium salts, you know, I think that's what they call those. Those are non-food sources. Too much of the non-food sources, magnesium, you could be looking at diarrhea, abdominal cramps, and nausea. All right, so what that means is there's not really a toxicity in magnesium when it comes to you getting it from food. Only supplements and magnesium salts. Now, the recommendation for men, 400 milligrams per day, and women, 310 milligrams per day. The upper limit, though, for non-food, again, is 350 milligrams. So if you take a supplement or you take magnesium salts, 350 milligrams, you want to make sure you don't surpass that. Okay, you don't exceed it. Sources that magnesium comes from, you get nuts, legumes, leafy green veggies, right? And you also some fish. Now in parentheses, I know it's a little small, I ran out of room, but it says H&S for the fish. Basically what that means is halibut and salmon. Those are the two types of fish that you can get magnesium from if you're going to be eating fish to get your magnesium intake. Finally, we have reached sulfur. So, sulfur stabilizes protein structures using the amino acids cysteine and methionine. Okay. Now, if you remember from my proteins video, cysteine and methionine, those are essential amino acids. They're 2 of 9, right, that your body needs. And because they're essential, your body can't synthesize those proteins on their own. They got to come from food. And so sulfur is also essential for skin, hair, and nails. Which, by the way, your skin, hair, and nails, those cells contain sulfur in its proteins. Okay. When you're deficient in sulfur, it makes it hard for your skin, hair, and nails to regenerate and grow at the rate that they're supposed to. Now, over here for deficiency symptoms. Now, sulfur has a direct relationship to protein, right? As we talked about the amino acids, cysteine and methionine. Well, protein deficiency will essentially occur first before a lack of sulfur does. So basically what that means is if you have a lack of sulfur, that's a result of a lack of protein. Now, there isn't any toxicity for it. Recommendations, there's also no recommendations either with that because sulfur typically is met with good protein intake. So if you got good protein consumption, you never got to worry about sulfur. No upper limit either, and the sources that you can get them from is actually the same as potassium and nuts. This has been the major minerals. Not much of a recap on this one. I mean, this was pretty self-explanatory. Make sure you get your minerals in. I do want to say though, before I end this, earlier I talked about how much how many grams of each mineral is found in a 132-pound person. So you can imagine that as a person is heavier, they may need just a little bit more. Depends though, okay? It all depends. There's different factors that come into play. Genetics is always going to be one of them, all right? Genetics, what your physical activity is like, your amino acid structure, as mentioned in my proteins video, that pretty much determines like the whole way forward. That determines how your body synthesizes just about everything, okay? So bottom line is you want to make sure that you're getting your vitamins and your minerals in, all right? And that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for tuning in. Hopefully I provided some value and insight to you, and if I did, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Any questions, comments, or concerns that you have, you know, definitely hit my comment section. I do check them periodically. So I appreciate y'all for, you know, tuning in and giving me your ear for a little while, and I'll see y'all on the next one, which by the way will be the last part of our micronutrient series, which is going to be the trace minerals. So the iron, zinc, you know, all the things that I went over on the other board, you know, briefly. I'm going to go into that. Y'all take care. Have a good one.